Hello, readers. I'm your designated bookworm, Josh, and today we're going to be talking about Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. I initially chose this book because, as of right now, Toni Morrison is the last American to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. She was chosen for this award in 1993, which means that no other American has won the Nobel Prize in Literature for almost 30 years now, which is crazy to me. I'm not sure exactly how. I did some research to see how people win the Nobel Prize. It seems like the biggest guideline is they have to have something published within the year that they are nominated for the award. And they have to, like, the writing that they have done has to have impacted the world in some way that would merit such a prestigious award. But because of this achievement, I wanted to read more of Toni Morrison. The first book I read of hers was Home, which was a really good book, and I might go back and read it again, do it for this show. But to try and become a better writer, I'm trying to dive into these authors who are gifted in just prose and character and dialogue and settings and just, I don't know, dissect it in a way so that I can become a better writer myself. Because of that, I wanted to pick Toni Morrison's first novel, and this, The Bluest Eye, is her first, and it just blows my mind that something this well written was the first thing that she had published. And it's one of those things where I don't know if anyone else experiences this, but when you see someone doing something that you are passionate about and they do it so well, it just makes you think, oh gosh, I shouldn't even try. Like, is there any hope for me? But that's not what this discussion is about. The thing is, though, in reading this book, her Morrison's literary talent was overshadowed by the seriousness of the topic that she wrote about. She, in the afterward, she talks about why she decided to choose this story, and she did it because a friend of hers in high school wanted to have blue eyes, and she thought that was the weirdest thing. She's an African American, and her friend is as well, and she thought it like the image of blue eyes on a black woman for some reason didn't sit right with her, and so she was wondering why someone would want that and do that. So that was kind of the what sparked her to write this story. And she talks about this a little bit more in a quote. She says, "The novel picks away at the gaze that condemned her," is kind of her reasoning as to why this was the case. And I want to emphasize the word gaze here because not only is the word eyes in the title, but it's also shows up 182 more times in the text throughout the end, and there's like I think 202 pages, and I could have missed a few. There's some where I is like incorporated in the other word, and I didn't circle those, so it's a very significant theme and symbol in this story. And we see that by how the story is told, how we see it through the eyes of other characters. You don't really get to any moment in Piccola's point of view as far as like first person wise. You sometimes get some things that I'll explain later, but for the most part, the story primarily takes place in other characters' point of view. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the gaze, Morrison talks about, she uses that to show how it destroys a young girl's self-image and how eyes are the windows that show a person's true nature. But before I continue and describe these points in more detail, I want to leave a disclaimer here for anybody who may not want to listen to or talk about what is going to be brought forward. You see, the main character, Piccola, is a 12-year-old black girl from Lorain, Ohio, which is where Morrison grew up. And in this story, it's going to talk about racism, poverty, sexual trauma, emotional and physical abuse, and the mental repercussions caused by the aforementioned topics dealt with in this novel. If these topics make you uncomfortable or in any way trigger past traumatic experiences for you, don't feel like you have to continue listening to this episode. I don't want to cause anyone to have to relive anything that may have been hurtful for them, and so I want to kind of put this up now so that people can leave if they need. But I also wanted to mention that I am a white male who, no matter how hard I try to understand the turmoil Piccola is put through, will never truly comprehend or relate to that trauma. I'm going to mention how the information Morrison delivers in her book impacted me while reading, and explain how I think books like these are a great way to start discussions and give people like me who have not experienced the pains of racism and other traumas an idea of what is going on, an idea of how the person going through this is feeling. Again, I'm not saying I fully understand and relate to Piccola or the millions of people who go through this, but I'm more aware of these problems and see them in society. And with that out of the way, let's start our discussion with a brief summary of the novel and how Morrison chose to write it. Like I said earlier, the story takes place in Lorain, Ohio. Some other towns are mentioned and lived in for a brief time, but they are used to explain how certain characters go to where... They explain how certain characters got to where they are at the point of Piccola's 12-year-old existence. And that's the most important piece of the story, is that moment in her life, this year. And the story takes place during 1941, when tension over World War II is starting to escalate. It starts before Pearl Harbor, but it does eventually get to the winter, so America starts to get more involved. And during this time, racial slandering is at a high, and it's strange how the book kind of starts. It's a very serious book, but it's strange how it starts. It starts with a excerpt from a Dick and Jane book. I'm not sure if Toni Morrison borrowed this from a actual Dick and Jane story, or if this was more of her creative liberty and being inspired by that. But she uses this really well to separate which character's point of view is being used in that portion of the story. So an example of this is, there's one where she talks about Jane wants to play with a dog, see dog play. It's like something like that. And in that portion of the story, we get an absolute terrible person. And this one thing Morrison does a really good job at, and she emphasizes this in her afterword, that she wanted to show the humanity in all people, even when we see them do these terrible things, so that in a way you can understand them and see, like, hey, everyone has a story in a sense. But that's kind of the bunny trail. And after she opens with this, she breaks the whole year into seasons, and changing of Piccola during these seasons. And I think she chose that to kind of emphasize that change. And as we see it through the eyes around her, we only get to enter, like I said earlier, her point of view, like first person point of view at the end of the story. But at that point, she has been through so much that she's just mentally broken from the trauma. Like, she starts hearing of voices and talking to the voices within her, and I want to talk more about that topic, but I'm not I don't think I'll end up being able to, just because of how much I want to unpack. But to keep going, after the Dick and Jane excerpt, we go into the point of view of a young girl named Claudia, who goes to school with Piccola. Her sister, Frida, is also present during this time, and the two sisters are talking about how the marigolds, which is a type of flower, are not growing because Piccola is going to have her father's baby. Now, that's not like a spoiler or anything. That's literally, I think, the first paragraph of the story. And it's just insane to start off like with something such a big, a traumatizing event of a father impregnating his daughter. And because it's being told through the eyes of a child, as the reader, you kind of take a step back and wonder, okay, how much of this is true? Like, is this some gossip that they've overheard that they're telling? Like, is this really what happens? And so it's a great hook to be like, okay, what happened to this girl? And because of Morrison's like just amazing skill in writing, I forgot all about this moment and was just so enamored in the story and what was going on that I didn't remember that this was even stated until you get to Charlie's point of view, which is the name of Piccolo's father. But before we find out how that atrocious event occurs, we learn about what led up to that moment and what Piccolo's deepest desires are. This desire is where the title comes from and does a better job of summing up what the book itself is about. Piccola believes that she is ugly, and that this ugliness is the cause of all of her misfortunes. To fix this, she believes that if she were to obtain blue eyes, she would be beautiful to herself and the world around her. We discover why Piccola would think that on page 46 when Morrison writes, "It occurred to Piccola some time ago that if her eyes, those eyes that held the pictures and knew the sights, if those eyes of hers were different, that is to say, beautiful, she herself would be different. Her teeth were good, and at least her nose was not big and flat like some of those who were thought so cute. If she looked different, beautiful maybe, Charlie would be different, and Mrs. Breedlove too. Maybe they'd say, 'Why, look at pretty-eyed Piccola. We mustn't do bad things in front of those pretty eyes.'" This quote shows us that not only does the world find her ugly and treat her in an ugly manner, but that her parents treat her that way too. The names given in this are actually her parents. Charlie, like I said earlier, is her dad, and Mrs. Breedlove's her mom. And her relationship with them is doesn't sound close or affectionate in this quote, and I can confirm that it is. And there's so much that you can unpack, and how Morrison like shows descriptive things about Piccola in this is so like it's super good. And I could geek out about it and all the other ways she describes characters. Like she even uses like other senses. It's super well done. But it's just, and you see this relationship between your parents and how it unfolds in the story, and how the relationship, how she sees their relationship, and it's not healthy either. And the only healthy relationship she has, like Claudia and Frida, are nice in moments, but they really are kind of more like like in the back, kind of watching and step in every once in a while. But there's three sex workers that live above her that are the only people that genuinely treat her with any affection, and I think Morrison uses them in a way again to show like, hey, just because someone's in this role doesn't mean that they're bad, or just because someone's in this good role that they're good. And that's again another topic, but I'm gonna go back to Piccola's desire for blue eyes and why she wants them. When it comes to like the quote above, I think that I mentioned earlier does a good job of explaining why she wanted them for like her parents to see her beauty. But later on, or I shouldn't say later, earlier on page like 20 to 21, Morrison explains kind of the societal impact of this, why blue eyes are important. And Morrison writes, "Adults, older girls, shops, magazines, newspapers, window signs. All the world had agreed that a blue-eyed, yellow-haired, pink-skinned doll was what every girl child treasured. Here, they said, this is beautiful." Now, just thinking, like, when I first read that and thinking, like, wow, like, this young girl sees what this toy that people think is beautiful and compares herself to it and does not see any likeness whatsoever. How devastating would that be? And I wish I could say that stuff like that doesn't happen anymore, but sadly, this idea of setting icons of beauty, masculinity, success, and other traits still happen, and people see that they don't match that image, and a disconnect within themselves occur, and you start to think you are lesser, and this is shown in Piccola and her family. Further on page 39, when Morrison writes, "You looked at them and they wondered why they were so ugly. You looked closely and could not find the source. Then you realized that it came from conviction, their conviction. It was as though some mysterious, all-knowing master had given each one a cloak of ugliness to wear, and they had each accepted it without question. The master had said, 'You are ugly people.' They looked about themselves and saw nothing to contradict the statement, saw, in fact, support for it leaning at them from every billboard, every movie, every glance." This quote is devastating yet real at the same time. I haven't experienced this on the level that Piccola and her family have, but I have compared myself to what society sees as ideal or superior and found that I don't match those traits and felt inadequate, or that I deserved the struggles that I was going through because of those inadequacies. But in reality, that's not true, and we all have something that we can do or that can contribute to society, and we all matter and deserve to feel like we matter and be treated fairly. I mean, now, I don't think that we could live in a world where we don't compare ourselves to others. Even if society was super inclusive or stopped promoting unrealistic traits in people, we would still compare ourselves to others. I believe we're a comparative species. When we see someone obtaining a result, a reaction, or outcome that we may desire, we tend to try and replicate or show how our own skill or orientation is equal or better than what we saw to gain that want. And that's just another part of human nature, that survival of the fittest kind of situation. And that's something that is instilled in us that I don't think it will ever go away. But however, I do think we can be kinder to one another and show that we all deserve to be treated fairly and have the ability to live a happy and successful life. Sadly, this isn't happening, and groups of people are not being treated fairly or allowed to have the same say or opportunities as others in society due to their race, sexual orientation, culture, physical limitations, age, and countless other reasons. And I'm not sure why this is still going on. I think everyone can agree that we feel the same way no matter how different we are. So it makes you wonder why someone would want to belittle or negate the success and quality of life of someone just because they are different. And Morrison highlights this topic later through Piccola's mom, Pauline, who Piccola calls Mrs. Breedlove. And during this particular scene, Pauline is giving birth to Piccola. Piccola has an older brother, Sammy, I think, if I remember correctly. And while she's giving birth to Piccola, a white doctor and his students come in to help deliver the baby. During this time, the doctor makes a comment about how, because Pauline is black, she doesn't experience pain like a white woman, or how she's designed for easy childbearing, much like a horse. And Morrison has Pauline procure a thought about the accusation about the horse, while also tying it in with the racist comments the doctor is saying. And Morrison writes, "I hurt just like them white women. Just because I wasn't hooping and hollering before didn't mean I wasn't feeling pain. What did they think? That just because I knowed how to have a baby with no fuss, that my behind wasn't pulling and aching like theirs? Besides, that doctor don't know what he talking about. He must never seed no mare fowl who say they don't have no pain. Just 'cause she don't cry, 'cause she can't say it, they think it ain't there. If they looks in her eyes and see them eyeballs lolling back, see the sorrowful look, they'd know." This quote shows how eyes represent someone's true self, and it also shows how just because someone doesn't act the way that is expected, it doesn't mean that they aren't feeling those things. For Pauline, she was having a ton of white men looking at her in an exposed state, saying things about her that aren't true, and never once asking how she felt. On top of that, Pauline has this martyr quality that you learn about during her portion of the story and her relationship with Charlie that kind of makes her feel like she deserves the treatment from others, and you kind of understand that based on how Charlie treats her, but and because of that though, she doesn't speak up to these people treating her poorly. But I do find it incredibly interesting how she's offended by them talking about the horse. And even though she doesn't say, like what I read to you out, she's thinking this, she knows that an animal feels just like a human would. And in this moment, the doctors are kind of treating her like an animal, even though she isn't. And I'm not saying like animals and humans feel exactly the same, or that people feel like how I feel pain is different from how my wife feels pain. And like everyone feels and experiences things differently, but we can all agree that we do still feel pain. And she sees it and like, hey, like thinking, why are you like, I feel this stuff, but yet you treat me differently. And it's just amazing to see how all this pans out. And as you can see, eyes can show the true nature of people because it's hard to hide the emotions that cross them. Sure, you could throw on a blank face, but odds are your eyes will give you away. Eyes also gaze at things they find beautiful, and when that spoken beauty doesn't match your own, like the doll's blue eyes that Piccola so desperately wants, don't match hers, it can leave her and other people that experience a similar thing feeling ugly and lesser, even though they aren't. And at this point, last video, I talked about the ending of Beowulf, but I don't want to tell you the ending of Toni Morrison's debut novel. I think reading this book and reaching its end is important. The story gives the reader insight on how racism, trauma, and loneliness can impact a person. I highly recommend this book. It is a masterclass novel and has a lot to teach both writers and just people in general. I will say it covers a lot of sad and at times traumatizing material, which may be hard for some readers to get through. If you do read it though, I can guarantee it will make you think and look at the world differently around you. Originally, I wanted to talk about the trauma Piccola went through, but after writing the script and going through it a few times, I figured I should save that for another episode. There'll be plenty of other books that cover that topic, but if you are interested in my thoughts about trauma in this particular story, I can make a second part for this discussion later on. If that doesn't interest you and you would like me to talk about something else, feel free to give me recommendations on what I should read next in the comments. If you can please like, subscribe, and share this video, that would also help a ton. I know it's annoying to constantly hear me say that, but it does help. It allows more people to see the videos, which gives the channel and you more opportunities to get the content you like. As always, thank you for listening to this video. I hope you have a great week, and until next time, never stop pondering.